Hi, I'm Brent Russell, owner of Tarrant County Pest Control, and welcome to C3. So, what this is a third part of this is the pesticide label and label comprehension. So, basically, there's 20 hours that you have to have, and there's 10 categories. In each category, you have to have 2 hours of classroom training in each category. What we're working on right now is the third part of that, which is the pesticide labels and label comprehension. And we're breaking down each one of these 2 hour segments into four 30-minute videos. So this is your third video on labels and comprehension, and there'll be one more after this, and that will complete the whole 2 hours for that section. So altogether, there are 10 categories with 2 hours in it each. Now that will add up to a total of 20 hours of classroom training that's required for you to have as an apprentice for you to be able to take your technician license. However, before you can take that license, there's still one other thing that you have to do, and you're required to have 8 hours of classroom training in each specific category. Typically, when you're starting off as an apprentice, that category is going to be pest control. It could be pest control or lawn and ornamental or weed control. Could be termites. But usually, as an apprentice, when you're starting off, it's going to be the general category of pest control. So, after you complete all 10 categories or subjects at 2 hours each, and you've got your 20 hours of classroom training that's required as an apprentice, then you can start running jobs on your own without having to have a certified applicator with you. You just have to be in contact with that applicator 3 days out of the week. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started on this. Is like I say, this is going to be C3, the third part, pesticide labels and label comprehension. And the next thing we're going to talk about is hazards to wildlife and the environment. Improperly applied pesticides may be harmful to the environment. Some products are classified restricted use because of environmental hazards alone. Label statements may include groundwater advisories, for example, or limitations that protect endangered species. Such limitations include restrictions on application rates or methods, or a ban on using the pesticide where endangered plants and animals live. If a pesticide is hazardous to specific plants or animals, it will be noted in the special toxicity statement on the label. For example, this product is highly toxic to bees, or it might say, this product is toxic to fish, or maybe this product is toxic to birds and wildlife. These statements help you choose the safest product for a job and remind you to take extra precautions. General environmental statements. You're going to find these on pesticide labels. These statements appear on nearly every pesticide label. They are reminders of common sense steps to avoid contaminating the environment. The absence of any of these statements does not mean that you can do without precautions. Examples of general environmental statements include: do not apply where runoff is likely to occur. Or it might say, do not apply where weather conditions favor drift from treated areas. they're talking about here that if it's too windy, and there's a chance that what you're spraying is going to drift over or blow into your neighbors or their neighbor's area, then that's not allowed. This is really important, especially in agriculture situations where you have a large fields, and if it's a windy day and you're out spraying these fields, this product could drift over into another field, say where a farmer has had some honeybees brought in. And these honeybees it's very expensive to maintain these hives. And so if your product drifts into the wrong area where, say, that they're having these bees, to help pollinate the crops, and this drifts in and it kills those bees, technically in the state of Texas, you're going to be liable for the loss for that beekeeper for him losing his bees. And you could even be held liable if it damages some of the crops that farmer is doing. So it's very important that you pay attention to some of these warnings, and if it says on there not to apply where the weather conditions favor drift, it's saying that if it's too windy and it might blow off a target and get somewhere else, do not apply it. So another example of a general environmental statement might be, keep out of any body of water. So when you see this statement, you have to kind of think about, how could your pesticide end up in water? And one of the simplest ways that this can happen is if you're, say, mixing pesticide out on the street, like a lot of us pesticide guys, when we're out in the field and we're working, we have to mix in the field. So it's not uncommon that we'll drop our tailgate and we'll mix chemicals on the tailgate of our truck. And then what happens if, say, you drop your pesticide container and some of that pesticide at 100% right out of the container was to spill into the street, and then, say, the neighbor's sprinklers came on and water started running down, or if it started raining and it washed that product down the street into the storm drain, and then that could poison the water system. Because what you have to realize is these storm drains in Texas, this is not like going down the drain, the sewer. When you flush the toilet or you turn on a sink in a house, that water goes down the sewer. That's a closed system, and it ends up at a sewer plant where they treat that water before they release it back. When water goes into a storm drain, there's no filtration, there's no cleaning of it at all. That water runs down the street into a storm drain, down some pipes, and into our ponds and our lakes in Texas. So it's very possible that you could spill some product in the road, that gets washed down into the storm drain and ends up in a pond, and then killing fish, because fish are highly susceptible to pesticides. So that's one of the things that you have to really watch out, especially under the general information. If it's telling you to keep out of any body of water, then that's a sign that it's telling you, if they want you to keep it out of water, there's probably a really good chance that this is going to kill fish very easy. Okay, another example of a general environmental statement would be, do not allow drift on desirable plants and trees. There again, don't apply it on a windy day if it's going to drift off a target. Or do not apply when bees are likely to be in the area. Like we were just talking about the bees. Not only do you have to be careful when you're applying this and watch out for drift to go into another neighbor's property, but even if you had a beekeeper that was working the neighbor's property and you were to use a product like, say, Termidor or Transport that has a transfer effect to it, those bees could come over into the area that you're spraying, get that product on them, and then carry it back into the hive, and it completely wipe out the hive. So you have to be careful. Even though this isn't drifting onto the neighbor's property, those bees could come into the area that you treated, and if that's the case, we got to watch out for that, especially if the label is saying not to apply it when bees are likely to be in the area. This doesn't go just for beekeepers and farmers, but also just in nature in general. The bees are part of the ecosystem, and we don't want to wipe them out. We want to try to protect them. Okay, and then finally, the last general environmental statement that you may see on a label that would be real common is do not apply where the water table is close to the surface. Now, this is talking about people that have well water. And it's very common in Texas for people, especially that live out in the country, that they drill a well and they draw their water up out of the well. Now, some of these wells, they only use the water for irrigation, but others, they use the water, they actually drink the water and they use it for their house as well, and to feed animals or to water animals. So, what they're saying here is do not apply, if you see this under a general statement, do not apply where water table is too close to the surface. And if you're applying at a house and you see a well right next to the house, you might want to ask them how deep is that well. Because what they're saying about this product is if you're seeing that statement, there's a chance that this particular pesticide that you're using is going to leach down through the soil. That means that it will easily, when you spray this product on the ground and it rains, that it will easily leach down through the soil and possibly go all the way down into the well and contaminate that well. So you have to be very careful of that situation. And that's one of those general environmental statements that will pop up on a label that you need to look at, and when you see these things, understand what it is that they're telling you and what the dangers are behind them. These are general statements, but they have a lot of meaning behind them. Restricted entry intervals, also known as REIs. A restricted entry interval is talking about how long people have to wait before they can go into an area that you treated. Now we're talking about people that are not wearing protective equipment. So this is a very, very common question that you get in just about every job that you ever do. Somebody's going to ask you, is it safe to go back in that room or into the house, or is it safe to let my pets back out into the yard? That's where the REI comes in, the restricted entry interval. So let's talk about that for a minute. Some pesticide labels contain re-entry precautions. This tells you how much time must pass before people can re-enter a treated area without protective clothing. These restricted entry intervals are set by the EPA and some states. Restricted entry intervals set by the states are not always listed on the label. It is your job to find out if a restricted entry interval exists. It is illegal and dangerous to ignore an REI. Poisoning is a risk to unprotected persons who enter a treated field before the REI has expired. It's saying that it's very dangerous to let people back into an area before it dries. I get this all the time. How long is it going to take to dry? People will ask me. That's not a real simple question to answer. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Because the real answer to that is it depends, right? It depends. You see, it depends on how hot it is or how cold it is. It depends on how much air is moving through that area. So just imagine that if you put some water in a spray bottle and you just sprayed that water on a counter, how long is it going to take for that to dry just sitting there naturally? Well, it depends on how much airflow is moving through, on if it has direct sunlight on it or if not, on the humidity levels. So we can't tell somebody that you can go back in that area in 30 minutes if the label says not to let somebody back into the area until it's dry. So be sure that you don't fall into the trap of saying, oh, it'll be fine to go back in 20 or 30 minutes. That's not necessarily true. It might be true, and it might be okay to go back into a house or an area 15 or 20 minutes after you've sprayed if it's dried, if you've sprayed it lightly and the conditions are right. But that's not what you want to tell people, because if you say to a customer you can go back in 20 minutes, they're going to take that at your word, and they're going to bring their little babies and their dogs and pets and family in there and let them play around. And the last thing that you want is for a little baby especially to be crawling on the floor and to get their hands into some wet pesticide. So it's very important that you explain to these people that it's not safe to go back into the area until the product has dried. Now that might take, you can tell them it might take 30 minutes to an hour, I don't know, but to make sure that it's completely dry before you go back in. Explain to them that you can wait 30 minutes and check. If it's dry, go ahead and go back in, but if not, give it another 30 minutes or give it another hour, whatever it takes. This is especially important if you're going in and doing a bed bug treatment or a German roach treatment where it's a very invasive treatment and you're using a lot of pesticides to do it. So make sure you communicate with your customers and you let them know that it's not a set amount of time to go back into an area, but it may be a case that it's more important that you make sure that the pesticide is dry, not how much time has passed. Storage and disposal. All labels give general instructions for proper storage and disposal of the pesticide and its container. These statements include statements like not for use or storage in or around homes. If you have a pesticide that says not to store it in or around homes, you want to make sure that if you're a home-based business that you don't end up, storing that in your garage or somewhere in your house. Another statement that might be included on a label that's in regards to storage and disposal might say store away from fertilizer. Now this is very important because pesticides and herbicides cannot be mixed, and sometimes pesticides and fertilizers cannot be mixed. Now sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. So it's very important that you read the labels to make sure that you can store some of these chemicals next to other chemicals. Another statement might say something like, do not reuse container. Now, pretty much every pesticide container that I've had, they don't want you to reuse it unless you're just going to put the same pesticide back in the container and refill it. Like if you have a quart size or a pint size container and you buy and you've used that up, and then you go the next time and you buy a gallon of it, it's okay to use that as long as the label doesn't say or exclude you from doing it. Then you can take some of that and just refill up your smaller containers and do that. Now, if the label says do not reuse the container, then you cannot do that. Something else that might be on a label might say do not contaminate water. Okay, so you have to think about this real carefully, that where you're storing your chemicals, you have to think about if something went wrong, if that container leaked, or if it fell over and say you weren't there when it happens and it started leaking, is it in an area where that water could easily get, say, out into the street and into the storm drain, or is it in an area that could contaminate, say, a koi pond or something like that that's close to the house or the business. These are things that are very important that you pay attention to when you decide on an area to store your pesticides. Always think about what can happen if things go wrong. Something else under storage and disposal that you'll see on almost all of the labels, and if it's not on the label, it is a state law in the state of Texas to triple rinse and puncture your containers, then to dispose of them in an approved EPA landfill or recycling. Now, in Texas, in Dallas, Fort Worth, they do not allow you to recycle pesticide containers. If it was allowed to do that and it says it's okay to do it on the container, then you can do it. But that's not the case in Texas. That what they want you to do is they want you to puncture it. They want you to triple rinse and puncture. That way they can make sure that all of that chemical has been rinsed out of that container, and that somebody else isn't going to come along and refill it with some water or something and use it for another purpose, that they could end up poisoning themselves or contaminating the environment in some way. So we're going to talk a little bit more later about how to properly triple rinse and puncture these containers. It's very important that you do it the right way, not only just to make sure that you're getting rid of all of this pesticide and you don't end up with extra pesticides, in the environment, but you want to make sure that you're getting all your pesticides out of these containers, because it's expensive. And if you can get an extra treatment by rinsing that out, then that's a good thing. So it could just be costing you money if you're not rinsing out these containers as well. And then the last thing I want to mention about storage is that you want to try to determine the best storage and disposal procedures for your operation and your location. So you have to think about where you're going to store your chemicals, what kind of chemicals you have, and you want to put some thought into that based on, well, for instance, if you have a business, if you have a large business with a warehouse, then it could be pretty easy for you to store chemicals. But you want to pay attention to how you store these chemicals. Some of these chemicals require to be stored in a ventilated area, or they require to be locked up inside of a cabinet or some kind of a container. If you're storing pesticides and you're a home-based business, then you want to make sure that you're not keeping any pesticides, one, that you can't keep at a house, and two, that if you're storing them at your house, that you're not just keeping them in the garage sitting on a shelf somewhere, because they need to be locked inside of a locked cabinet, and it may need to be ventilated as well. So that kind of reduces where I can keep pesticides. I am a home-based business. I run my business out of my house and out of my garage, and I do not keep any chemicals at all in my garage or in my house. All of my chemicals are kept on my truck. When they come to do my inspections, when the Texas Department of Agriculture sends an inspector around, every time they've ever inspected me, they've always asked me if I have any chemicals on the premises. They're going to inspect that and they want to look for it. Make sure that if you do keep chemicals on the premises, that you put it in the right container and that you lock it up and that it's properly ventilated. So I always tell them, no, I don't keep any chemicals on the premises. I keep them all on my truck. This is perfectly legal in the state of Texas, as long as the label, once again, allows it, and everything that I use allows me to keep my chemicals in my truck, locked up inside of my toolbox, so that people and kids don't have access to it. So when it comes to storage, you want to put some thought into that. You want to make sure that you're storing your product somewhere that it's safe, that the fumes aren't going to get to you, that the kids and the pets can't get to it, that if something goes wrong with the container, or something just happens and you have a catastrophic failure, and you get chemical all over, spilled all over the place, that you're prepared to deal with that, that you want to make sure that you're going to be, if you're storing chemicals at your place of business or in your garage or your home, that you have a chemical spill kit around with you as well. That's something that I also carry because I keep my chemicals in my truck. I always carry some kitty litter. Now, kitty litter is very cheap to buy, and it's a very good absorbent. So if you spill some raw chemical, you can take this kitty litter or something else that works really well. It's just absorbent that you can buy, that mechanics use when they're working on cars and they spill oil on the floor. They can buy big bags of this absorbent that you can put on it, and it'll soak it up. So that's what you want to do if you spill some chemical. We're going to talk about that in another session a little bit more in detail. But you want to make sure that you have it stored in the right place where the fumes aren't going to get to you, where the kids won't get to you, that if a spill happens, that it's not going to leak and get out into the city water or into a pond that's close to you and destroy the environment or pets or kids or something like that. You also want to make sure that you have it locked up and in a proper place. You want to read those labels, make sure that's right, and you want to make sure that you have a plan in place so that if something goes wrong, you're able to take care of that with a spill kit or something like that. Directions for use. All pesticide labels have directions for use. To apply a pesticide correctly, follow the directions on the label. These instructions tell you things like the pest that the manufacturers say the product will control, the crop, animal, or site to which the product may be applied, in what form you may apply the product, whether it be a powder, a liquid, or a granular, the proper equipment to use, how much to use, mixing directions, where you may apply the material, and when to apply it. All pesticide labels have these very common, important instructions to let you know these things. Please try to familiarize yourself with pesticide labels. Get the labels as often as you can and read them to try to understand them. The more that you read them, the easier they are to comprehend. If there's something you don't understand, ask a certified applicator or the vendor where you bought the product from, and they'll be happy to help you. So the best way to learn these labels is to read them and study them. There's really not a better way to learn them. The labels, for an example, that come on the bottles, like on these Telstar jugs, you can peel that label off and put it in your pocket and carry it with you and study it any time that it's convenient to you. Of course, you can always go down online and download these labels as well.